Alien hieroglyphs dripped with acidic blood. Dead Martians clutched ancient glaives. The ancient sleek ship dwarfed the small NASA shuttle. Clearly, something awakened a deadly force on this alien ship found in Mars orbit. NASA astronaut Nicholas Jackson gulped. Sweat trickled down the back of his neck as his gloved fingers squeezed the joystick of his tiny space shuttle. Tethered to the massive alien vessel looming before him, he knew the odds were against him. Alone in the blackness above Mars, he had one job: get inside the derelict ship, grab any alien tech he could haul back, and figure out what the hell happened here. Only problem: something killed the crew and it looked pissed. Nicholas checked his EVA suit for the 5th time as the airlock equalized pressure. Mag boots clanked onto the alien deck. Helmet lights swiveled, illuminating bulkheads of foreign alloys patterned with disturbing, intricate runes. At the end of the corridor, a titanic circular vault door hung partially open, heat shimmering behind it. Dread spiked through Nicholas's spine as he registered claw marks gouging the alien steel around the blast door's edges. Whatever tore through that reinforced airlock had to be stupidly strong, and it sounded very much awake now, growling and thumping around deeper in the Cyclopean ship's bowels, like an apex predator roused from ancient slumber. Nicholas knew he should jam back to his shuttle and bail, but humanity needed a game-changer. The tattered global economy couldn't afford more deep space failures. Nicholas gritted his teeth and trudged forward into the eerie dark of the alien ship, praying he wasn't making a lethal mistake. Nicholas crept down the alien ship's eerie corridor. Otherworldly hieroglyphs crawled along the walls, their edges tinted with dried crimson blood. His comms unit crackled to life. "Nick, it's Ethan. You've got to get out of there. We're picking up crazy energy spikes from your location." Ethan's voice was thin with panic. "I can't abandon the mission now. This ship is a goldmine. The tech here could be a game-changer for Earth." Nicholas clenched his jaw as he pushed forward. Static swallowed Ethan's reply. "Forget the tech. There's a massive object inbound on a collision course with the derelict. You have to evac him." Nicholas's heart thudded against his ribs. He had to move fast. He sprinted through winding passageways toward the heart of the alien vessel. At last he reached a cavernous central chamber. A glowing orb hung suspended in the center, pulsing with eldritch light. Nicholas took a step toward it. Suddenly a powerful hand seized his shoulder from behind. Nicholas whirled around, his eyes widened. Looming over him was a hulking creature, a mass of scales, spines, and sinew. Fanged mandibles clicked as it spoke through a crackling translator. "I am Pollux, last of the Zindi. The orb is the key to a planet-killing weapon. It cannot fall into the wrong hands." Nicholas's mind raced. A planet killer. In human hands it could end wars before they began, save billions of lives. "We have to destroy it," Pollux growled. "An ancient enemy my kind's destroyers approaches to claim it." Nicholas shook his head. "We can't destroy this. It's too valuable. Humanity can learn to wield it responsibly." Pollux's claws dug into Nicholas's EVA suit. "You cannot comprehend the forces you toy with, Earthling. The orb must burn." Proximity alarms blared through the chamber. The enemy fleet had arrived. Nicholas and Pollux locked eyes as the ship quaked around them. The ship shuddered violently, nearly knocking Nicholas and Pollux off their feet. Alarms blared as the hull breach widened, venting precious atmosphere into the void. Pollux slammed a clawed fist against the blast door controls, sealing them inside the control room with the pulsating orb. "The hull integrity is critical. We don't have much time," Pollux hissed, his mandibles clicking in agitation. "It's more than just a power source or a key," Pollux replied, his voice tinged with reverence. "It's a sentient being capable of manipulating the very fabric of the universe." Nicholas's eyes widened. "It's alive?" Pollux nodded. "In a sense, yes, and it's been communicating with me telepathically, urging me to fulfill my mission and destroy the Zindi fleet." The ship rocked again as the enemy fleet drew closer, their weapons pounding against the weakened hull. Nicholas's mind raced, desperately searching for a solution. "We can't destroy it," he said, a plan forming in his mind. but maybe we can use its power to our advantage. A wormhole, Nicholas explained, his voice rising with excitement. We use the orb to create a stable wormhole that will transport us and the ship directly to Earth. Once we're there, we can study the technology, replicate it. It could give us the edge we need against the Xindi and any other threats out there. Pollux hesitated, torn between his duty and the prospect of saving countless lives. The orb pulsed, as if sensing his indecision. I don't know, Pollux growled. My mission was clear, destroy the orb no matter the cost. But think about it, Nicholas pressed. This could change everything for both our species. We have a chance to do something extraordinary here. Pollux looked from Nicholas to the orb, his resolve wavering. Finally he nodded. All right, Earthling, we'll try it your way, but if this goes wrong, it's on you. Together they approached the orb, their hands outstretched. As their fingers brushed its surface, a surge of energy coursed through their bodies, and a deep, resonant hum filled the room. Nicholas closed his eyes, focusing his thoughts on the wormhole, picturing the equations and variables that would make it stable. The orb responded, its glow intensifying until it was almost blinding. A swirling vortex began to form around the ship, growing larger and more powerful with each passing second. The Xindi fleet, realizing what was happening, unleashed a barrage of weapons fire, but it was too late. In a flash of brilliant light, the derelict vessel vanished, swallowed up by the wormhole. The Xindi ships were left behind, their quarry now far beyond their reach. Moments later, the alien craft emerged in Earth's orbit, its sudden appearance sending shockwaves through the planet's defense systems. NASA's deep space sensors immediately locked onto the ship, and the world below erupted into a frenzy of panic and amazement. On board the vessel, Nicholas and Pollux shared a look of triumph and trepidation. They had done the impossible, but the consequences of their actions were yet to be seen. As they prepared to disembark, Nicholas couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger, more dangerous adventure. As Nicholas and Pollux stepped toward the airlock, the ship's internal sensors blared an alert. The outer hatch hissed open, revealing a half-dozen heavily armed soldiers in NASA pressure suits, weapons trained on the pair. At their head stood Colonel Victor Strand, Nicholas's old rival from astronaut training. Strand's face was set in hard lines behind his helmet visor. Nicholas Jackson, surrender the orb and the alien immediately by order of the President of the United States. Strand's voice crackled over the suit comms. Nicholas held up a gloved hand. Victor, listen to me. This technology, it's a game changer. We have to study it. Negative, Strand barked. That thing's too dangerous. Hand it over now, or we'll take it by force. Pollux growled, his claws flexing. The security team's rifles snapped up, targeting the Xindi. Nicholas stepped between them, heart pounding. The orb could revolutionize our understanding of the universe. It might be our only defense against what's out there. You can't just lock it away. Strand's finger hovered over his trigger. Don't make me do this, Nick. That's an order. Suddenly Pollux staggered, clutching his head, mandibles clicking in distress. No, it's in my mind. He collapsed to his knees, shaking. Nicholas whirled. The orb pulsed with sickening light, tendrils of energy snaking toward Pollux. Nicholas's blood ran cold. It was corrupting Pollux, seizing control. He looked back at Strand, anguished. Feels too strong. You're right, it can't be controlled. We have to destroy it. In a burst of desperate speed, Nicholas lunged, snatching the orb from its pedestal. Strand and his men shouted, but Nicholas was already sprinting, zigging and zagging as bullets sparked off the bulkheads. He hurtled through the twisting passages, the orb burning cold against his chest. Alarms blared and Strand's pounding boots echoed behind him. Nicholas's mind raced. He had to end this now, before the orb consumed him too. He skidded to a halt in a cavernous chamber, dominated by a colossal pillar of seething plasma, the ship's power core. Nicholas stared at the orb, feeling its insidious pull on his thoughts. Strand's shouts grew louder, closer. Nicholas knew what he had to do, hurl the orb into the core, and let the reactor's apocalyptic energies vaporize it. But the resulting meltdown would annihilate the ship and everyone aboard. He had only seconds to choose. Save himself and Earth by surrendering the orb to Strand's lock and key, or destroy it no matter the cost. Nicholas steeled himself as Strand and his team burst into the chamber, weapons leveled at his head. The orb pulsed in his hands, yearning for his soul. Nicholas's finger hovered over the trigger, ready to consign the orb and himself to oblivion. The voices of Strand's men echoed closer. At the last second, Pollux burst into the chamber, his eyes clear and determined. "Wait, I have a plan," the Xindi warrior barked, rushing to a nearby control panel. His claws flew over the alien interface. "I can open a one-way portal to the nearest star. We send the orb through, and the solar inferno will vaporize it." Nicholas hesitated, hope warring with desperation in his chest. "Are you sure? What about the ship?" A shimmering rift yawned open above the reactor, a swirling maw of searing light and heat. Nicholas locked eyes with Pollux, then hurled the orb into the portal with all his strength. It vanished instantly, consumed by the stellar fire. The ship convulsed, rocked by a massive energy surge. Alarms screamed and conduits burst, showering the chamber with sparks. The portal collapsed with a thunderous boom. "We have to get out of here," Nicholas shouted over the cacophony. He and Pollux sprinted for the airlock, the corridors collapsing around them. Pollux hauled twisted beams aside with his massive strength, clearing the path. They rounded a corner and found Strand and his men pinned under a massive girder. Nicholas paused, torn. Every instinct screamed to run to save himself, but he couldn't leave them, not even Strand. "Help me," he yelled to Pollux, gripping the scorching metal. Together, straining and groaning, they lifted the beam just enough for the trapped men to scramble free. The ship was tearing itself apart, the deck bucking and heaving. The ragtag group staggered into the airlock, sealing the hatch behind them. They piled into Nicholas's shuttle, Pollux barely squeezing into the cockpit. Nicholas punched the thrusters, and the tiny craft blasted away from the disintegrating alien ship. Moments later, the derelict exploded, a soundless blossom of light and shrapnel. The shuttle tumbled end over end, alarms blaring. Nicholas fought the controls, his knuckles white until the gyros stabilized. "NASA Command, this is astronaut Nicholas Jackson," he broadcast, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and relief. "The orb has been destroyed. Repeat, the alien weapon is destroyed, but we lost the ship." Cheers erupted over the comm from Mission Control, tinny and ecstatic. Nicholas sagged back in his seat, feeling 100 years old. He met Pollux's eyes, seeing the same weariness and grim satisfaction. They had done it. They had saved Earth and possibly the galaxy. But as the blue curve of his homeworld swelled in the viewports, Nicholas couldn't shake a cold sliver of dread. The Xindi would come, he knew. Come for their lost weapon and for revenge. Earth had just stepped onto the galactic stage, and their opening act had been to make a terrible enemy. As the shuttle streaked down through the atmosphere, Nicholas stared at the scudding clouds and tried to imagine what kind of world, what kind of war he was returning to. The shuttle touched down at NASA headquarters, an army of awestruck technicians and military personnel swarming the landing pad. Pollux emerged first, ignoring the sea of stunned faces and leveled rifles. Nicholas followed close behind, blinking in the glare of sunlight and camera flashes. They had barely reached the tarmac before a swarm of black-clad agents enveloped them, hustling them toward a waiting chopper. Nicholas craned his neck, searching for a familiar face, the administrator, the press corps, anyone. But there was only the inscrutable wall of suits and sunglasses. "What's going on?" Nicholas shouted over the roar of the rotors. "Where are you taking us?" "Please come with us. The President and the UN Security Council have invoked emergency protocols. We need to debrief you immediately, before the Xindi retaliation begins." Nicholas and Pollux shared a heavy look as they were bundled aboard the chopper. The doors slammed shut and the aircraft leapt into the sky, banking hard toward the horizon. Below, The world celebrated two new heroes, unaware that their greatest challenge was only just beginning. The black chopper touched down on the tarmac of a sprawling government compound, its rotors whipping up a storm of dust and debris. Nicholas and Pollux were hustled out, surrounded by a phalanx of stern-faced agents in crisp suits. They were marched into a sleek, nondescript building, their footsteps echoing in the sterile corridors. They were ushered into a dimly lit conference room, where a panel of high-ranking officials awaited them. Generals, admirals, and intelligence directors, their faces lined with the weight of their responsibilities. At the head of the table sat a severe woman with steel-grey hair and piercing eyes. "Astronaut Jackson, welcome back," she said, her voice cool and clipped. "And you must be Pollux. We've been expecting you." The woman leaned forward, steepling her fingers. "Your mission, Mr. Jackson, was part of a larger operation. We've been monitoring that alien ship for months, ever since it appeared in Mars orbit." "You knew about it?" Nicholas demanded, his voice rising. "Then why send me in blind?" Pollux growled, his claws flexing. "You used him, used us both." The woman nodded, unfazed. "We did what was necessary. That orb, that technology. It could have been a game-changer, for us and for our enemies." Nicholas slammed his fist on the table, the sudden noise making the others flinch. "I nearly died up there, we both did. And for what? Some secret government power play?" The woman stood, her gaze hard. "This is bigger than you, Jackson. Bigger than all of us. The truth is, we've been preparing for this day for a long time." "Roswell, 1947, she said. "Only it wasn't a weather balloon or little green men. It was a Xindi scout ship." Nicholas felt his blood run cold. Pollux hissed, his mandibles clicking. "We've known about the Xindi for decades," the woman continued. "Ever since we recovered that wreckage, we've been studying their technology, trying to understand it, to harness it, all in preparation for the day they would return." Nicholas shook his head, trying to process the revelation. "But the orb, the derelict ship, why not just tell me?" "Would you have believed it? Would the public?" The woman shook her head. "Panic and chaos would have been inevitable. We had to operate in secret to maintain control." Suddenly an alarm blared through the compound, red lights flashing. The officials erupted into a flurry of activity, shouting orders and consulting datapads. "What's happening?" Nicholas demanded, his heart pounding. The woman turned to him, her face grave. "Our worst fears realized. A Xindi armada has just entered the solar system. They're on a direct course for Earth." "We need you, Jackson," the woman said, her voice urgent. "You and Pollux. You're the only ones who have faced the Xindi and lived. You know their technology, their tactics." She gestured to a group of uniformed men and women who had entered the room, their faces hard with determination. "This is our elite task force, our last line of defense. Pilots, soldiers, scientists, the best of the best. And you're going to lead them." Nicholas looked at Pollux, seeing his own shock and fear reflected in the alien's eyes. This was all happening too fast, too much. But he knew he had no choice. The woman smiled grimly. "We have a plan, a way to take the fight to the Xindi, but it all hinges on you, on your knowledge, your skills, and on the intel Pollux can provide about their weaknesses." She leaned in close, her eyes boring into Nicholas's. "The fate of the world is in your hands, Astronaut Jackson. It's time to suit up." Nicholas and Pollux were led to a cavernous hangar deep within the complex, bustling with activity, as technicians swarmed over sleek, deadly-looking spacecraft. Nicholas recognized the angular silhouettes, the pulsing energy cores. They were Xindi designs, reverse-engineered and adapted for human pilots. A tall, wiry man with commander's bars on his uniform strode up to them, his face a map of scars and hard-won experience. "Jackson Pollux, I'm Commander Reeves. Welcome to Project Vanguard." Nicholas blinked, recognition dawning. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" Reeves grinned, clapping Nicholas on the shoulder. "You didn't think you were the only one with secrets, did you? I've been part of this program since the beginning, ever since we first cracked the Xindi's shield technology." He led them to a holographic display table, where a glowing schematic of a Xindi warship rotated in mid-air. "We've identified a weakness in their defenses," Reeves explained, pointing to a pulsing node on the ship's hull. "A resonance frequency that can disrupt their shields, leave them vulnerable, but it requires a precise strike at close range." Pollux leaned in, studying the display. "A difficult task given their firepower. Your ships would be torn apart before they could get near." "Not if we do it right," Reeves countered. "Pollux, you know their tactics, their command structure. Where would they be most vulnerable, most distracted?" The Xindi warrior considered, his eyes distant. "The Apex, the command ship. It will be at the center of the fleet, directing the attack. If you can engage them, force them to commit their reserves." "Then we might have a shot," Nicholas finished, the plan taking shape in his mind. "A small team using the new stealth tech, slip past their lines, hit them where it hurts." Reeves grinned, a fierce light in his eyes. "Exactly, and I can't think of anyone better to lead that team than you two." Nicholas and Pollux shared a look, a silent communication passing between them. They had started this journey as enemies, as captor and captive. But now, the fate of two worlds rested on their shoulders. "Let's do it," Nicholas said, his voice hard with resolve. "Let's take the fight to the Xindi." As the task force scrambled to prepare, to arm their ships and brief their pilots, Nicholas and Pollux pored over the intel, looking for any advantage, any edge they could exploit. Time was running out, the Xindi armada drawing closer with every passing minute. Nicholas's mind raced, strategies and scenarios playing out in his head. He thought of Earth, of the billions of lives hanging in the balance, of his family, his friends, everyone he had ever known or loved. He thought of the orb, of the terrible power they had unleashed upon the universe. The Xindi had come for vengeance, for blood, and he had played a part in that, however unwitting. But he also thought of Pollux, of the bond they had forged through fire and adversity, of the courage and sacrifice the Xindi warrior had shown, turning against his own kind to protect an alien world. They were an unlikely pair, a human and a Xindi, two enemies turned allies, but perhaps that was what it would take in the end, to bridge the gap between worlds, to find common ground in the face of annihilation. As the klaxons blared and the pilots raced to their ships, Nicholas and Pollux strode to the hangar, their faces set with grim determination. They knew the odds, knew the risks, but they also knew what was at stake. Earth, humanity, the future itself. And as they climbed into their waiting ships, the roar of engines filling the air, they knew that whatever happened, they would face it together. Two warriors, two friends, united against the darkness. The howling emptiness of space erupted into a storm of plasma fire and shearing metal as the ragtag human fleet clashed with the Xindi armada. Nicholas gripped the arms of his command chair until his knuckles whitened, his eyes locked on the tactical display. The Terran ships, bristling with reverse-engineered Xindi cannons and shield generators, swarmed the enemy vanguard, pummeling their angular hulls with lances of searing light. "All squadrons, engage cloaking devices on my mark," Nicholas barked into the fleet-wide comm. "Draw them in, then hit them with the graviton torpedoes. Let's see how they like a taste of their own medicine." A chorus of acknowledgments crackled through the channel as the human ships shimmered and vanished, fading into the starry backdrop. The Xindi vessels, momentarily confused, pressed forward, their formation spreading thin as they searched for their elusive prey. Nicholas held his breath, his finger hovering over the firing control. "Steady, steady!" "Now," Nicholas roared, "all ships decloak and fire." Space lit up like a supernova as dozens of human vessels materialized behind the Xindi lines, their weapon ports flaring with dazzling brilliance. Graviton torpedoes, designed to penetrate and destabilize the Xindi's crystalline shields, streaked through the void, detonating against the enemy ships in blossoms of blinding white. But the Xindi adapted with terrifying speed. Even as the first wave of torpedoes found their marks, the alien ships spun and whirled, their hulls reconfiguring in real time to deflect the incoming fire. They counterattacked with ruthless precision, their plasma beams slicing through human shields like a scythe through wheat. Nicholas watched in horror as friendly IFF tags winked out one by one, each a life snuffed out in the cold of space. "Fall back!" he shouted, his voice raw with desperation. "All ships, fall back to low Earth orbit. Use the gravity well to throw off their targeting." The remnants of the human fleet disengaged, limping and trailing debris as they fled toward the blue-green curve of their homeworld. But the Xindi gave no quarter, harrying the retreating vessels with merciless volleys, picking off stragglers with predatory efficiency. As the battle raged into the skies above Earth's teeming cities, the comm crackled with panicked reports from the surface. Xindi dropships were landing in the streets, disgorging hordes of armored warriors into the heart of humanity's defenses. The air shook with the thunder of orbital bombardment and the wailing of civil defense sirens. Nicholas slumped back in his chair, his face ashen. They were losing. The Xindi were too strong, too advanced. Earth's last hope was fading before his eyes. Suddenly the comm chimed with an incoming transmission from NASA Command. "Nicholas, we've detected an energy signature from the wreckage of the alien ship near Mars. It matches the orb's frequency." Nicholas bolted upright, his heart pounding. The orb, but it was destroyed. A fragment must have survived the blast. If you can retrieve it, it might give us the edge we need to turn the tide. Nicholas turned to Pollux, the Xindi warrior standing stoic at his side. "Looks like we're not done yet, old friend." Pollux nodded grimly, his clawed hands flexing. "Then let us finish this once and for all." They sprinted to the hangar bay, dodging falling debris and sparking conduits as the ship shuddered under the Xindi assault. They leaped into a small, agile shuttle, its engines already thrumming with power. As they rocketed away from the battered flagship, weaving through the chaos of the orbital battle, Nicholas felt a flicker of hope kindling in his chest. The orb fragment was their last chance, a final gambit in a war that had already claimed too many lives. They reached the derelict ship in a matter of minutes, the ancient hull looming like a ghostly leviathan against the stars. They docked with a jagged breach in the ship's flank, the shuttle's clamps biting into the twisted metal. Nicholas and Pollux clambered into the wreckage, their suit lights piercing the gloom. They picked their way through the debris-strewn corridors, following the faint, pulsing beacon of the orb fragment's energy signature. At last, they reached the ship's shattered core, a cavernous chamber of shadows and twisted metal, and there, glinting in the darkness, was a shard of the orb, no larger than a fist, but thrumming with an inner radiance. Nicholas reached for it, his gloved fingers trembling, but as they closed around the fragment, a hissing sound filled the chamber, and a hulking figure emerged from the depths. It was a Xindi, a warrior encased in battle-scarred armor, his eyes glinting with malice. "I am Krell," he growled, his voice a guttural rasp. "And you, human, have something that belongs to us." Nicholas and Pollux moved as one, dropping into combat stances as Krell charged, a crackling energy blade leaping to life in his hand. They met in a clash of sparks and scraping metal, trading blows in a deadly dance among the wreckage. Krell was strong, his movements fluid and lightning quick. He pressed the attack, driving Nicholas back with a flurry of slashes and thrusts, but Pollux was there, intercepting a blow that would have severed Nicholas's head, his own claws raking across Krell's armor. They fought in a whirlwind of desperate savagery, the air ringing with the clash of blade against claw. Nicholas gripped the orb fragment tightly, shielding it with his body as he fended off Krell's relentless assault. In a last desperate gambit, Pollux launched himself at Krell, grappling the Xindi warrior in a bone-crushing embrace. They tumbled across the deck, locked in a deadly embrace, as Nicholas scrambled for the shuttle. He was halfway up the ramp when a scream tore through the air. He spun, his heart in his throat, to see Pollux, crumpled on the deck, a jagged wound gaping in his chest. Krell stood over him, his blade dripping with dark blood, a triumphant snarl on his face. Nicholas didn't hesitate. He triggered the shuttle's thrusters. The sudden burst of acceleration slamming him back against the bulkhead, the small craft tore free of the wreckage, debris clattering off its hull as it hurtled into open space. In the rear-view monitor, Nicholas saw Krell standing in the breach, his eyes burning with hatred as the ship receded into the distance. A cold knot of dread settled in Nicholas's gut. Pollux, his friend, his comrade in arms, was gone, but his sacrifice would not be in vain. Nicholas clutched the orb fragment to his chest as Earth swelled before him, a blue-green jewel shrouded in the fire and smoke of war. He had the key to victory now, the last hope for his world and his species. But as he plunged into the maelstrom of the battle, dodging enemy fire and friendly ships alike, he knew that the hardest fight was still to come. The Xindi would not rest until the fragment was theirs, and he would not rest until they were defeated, once and for all. The fate of the world hung in the balance as Nicholas raced toward the brilliance of home, a tiny mote of light against the infinite dark of space. The shuttle shook violently as Nicholas and Pollux rocketed back toward the Earth, the battered hull creaking under the strain. In the rear compartment, the orb fragment pulsed erratically, its eldritch energies surging and receding like a sickly heartbeat. "It's no good," Pollux growled, his claws dancing over the shuttle's controls. "The fragment's too unstable. If we try to weaponize it, it could destroy half the solar system." Nicholas gritted his teeth, his mind racing. They were out of options, out of time. The Xindi armada was closing in on Earth, and humanity's defenses were crumbling. They needed a miracle. Suddenly Pollux's eyes widened. "The wormhole, we can do it again, just like before, but this time we lure the Xindi into it. Send them somewhere they can't hurt anyone." Nicholas hesitated for a heartbeat, the implications sinking in. It was a desperate gamble, but it might be their only chance to save Earth without resorting to genocide. "Do it," he said, his voice hard. "I'll get on the horn to NASA, tell them to get ready for a coordinated attack. We'll herd those Xindi bastards right into the wormhole's mouth." As they hurtled into Earth's upper atmosphere, Nicholas and Pollux hunched over the fragment, focusing their thoughts, their very essence, into the swirling vortex of exotic energy. The shuttle's systems flickered and dimmed as the fragment drew deeply from its power reserves, the air crackling with ozone. Beyond the viewports, space itself began to ripple and distort, a shimmering whirlpool of light and shadow blossoming into existence. The shuttle groaned and shuddered as the wormhole's gravity well tugged at its hull, threatening to tear it apart. At the same time, the remnants of Earth's fleet surged forward in a desperate counterattack, missiles and plasma beams stitching the void. The Xindi ships reeled under the onslaught, their formations buckling and scattering. But it was too little, too late. The wormhole yawned wide, its event horizon a swirling maelstrom of impossible colors and shapes. The Xindi, realizing the trap, tried to pull away, to flee back into deep space. But Earth's ships pressed the attack, herding the alien vessels like sheepdogs driving a flock. One by one, the Xindi ships vanished into the wormhole, their hulls stretching and distorting as they crossed the threshold. Only Krell remained, his ship a battered, smoking ruin. With a snarl of hatred, he threw his crippled craft into a kamikaze run, aiming to take Nicholas and Pollux with him into oblivion. Nicholas wrenched the shuttle's controls, sending them hurtling directly toward Krell's ship. Pollux roared in defiance, the fragment clutched to his chest, his eyes blazing with a warrior's fury. The two ships played a deadly game of chicken, hurtling toward each other at impossible speeds. At the last instant, Nicholas wrenched the shuttle into a gut-wrenching swerve. Krell's ship shot past, missing them by meters, and plunged into the wormhole. The vortex collapsed with a silent thunderclap, the fabric of space-time knitting itself back together. In the sudden stillness, a ragged cheer went up from Earth's surviving ships. But Nicholas had no time to savor the victory. In the co-pilot seat, Pollux slumped, his breathing shallow, his life signs fading. Dark blood pooled beneath him, a jagged shard of metal protruding from his chest. Nicholas reached out, gripping his friend's hand as he guided the shuttle back toward Earth. The battle was won, but the war was far from over, and Earth would need every ally it could get in the dark days ahead. The shuttle's landing gear hit the tarmac with a jolt, sending a fresh spike of pain through Pollux's battered body. Nicholas was already unstrapping himself, his face set with urgency. The rear hatch hissed open, and a swarm of medics and scientists flooded into the cramped cabin. They transferred Pollux onto a gurney with swift, practiced movements, shouting jargon-heavy commands to each other. As they rushed Pollux away, a group of stern-faced military officials pulled Nicholas aside. They fired off a barrage of questions, demanding a full debrief of the mission. Nicholas answered on autopilot, his thoughts still spinning from the whirlwind of the past few hours. In the chaos, a familiar face caught his eye. Dr. Eliza Hayward, his old friend from the academy days. Eliza pushed through the crowd, her eyes bright with excitement. "Nick, you won't believe what we've discovered," she said, pulling him away from the officials. "The Xindi tech from the Nevada crash. We think we can use it to save your friend." Hope surged in Nicholas's chest. "What do you need from me?" "Just your clearance and your trust," Eliza said, already leading him down the corridor. "And we need to move fast." They raced through the labyrinthine facility, Eliza explaining as they went. Her team had been reverse engineering the Xindi's advanced healing technology, and they had a prototype ready, but they needed Nicholas's high-level clearance to access it. They burst into Eliza's lab, a cavernous space bristling with alien tech and humming machinery. In the center stood a sleek cylindrical device, pulsing with an eerie blue light. The medics had already transferred Pollux inside, his still form suspended in a web of glowing filaments. Eliza darted to the control panel, her fingers flying over the alien glyphs. "I'm initializing the sequence," she called over the rising hum of the machine. "Nick, I need you to monitor his vitals." Nicholas rushed to the display, his heart in his throat. For a long, terrifying moment, Pollux's life signs remained flatlined, the device's glow casting ghastly shadows over his pallid face. Then, miraculously, the biosensors began to flicker and dance. Pollux's chest rose and fell, color returning to his cheeks. The lacerations and burns that covered his body started to knit and fade before their eyes. Pollux's eyes fluttered open, hazy with confusion and relief. He managed a weak smile at Nicholas. "Thank you, my friend," he rasped. "I owe you my life." Nicholas clasped Pollux's hand, his vision blurring with tears. But before he could reply, an alarm blared through the lab, shattering the moment. He and Eliza rushed to the wall of monitors, their blood running cold at the sight that greeted them. A fresh Xindi armada had just emerged from a wormhole at the edge of the solar system, and they were bearing down on Earth fast. "Our defenses are in shambles," Eliza whispered, her face ashen. "We can't withstand another attack, not so soon." Nicholas squared his shoulders, a cold resolve settling over him. He met Pollux's gaze, seeing his own grim determination reflected back. "Then we'll just have to stop them," Nicholas said, already striding towards the door. "Suit up, Pollux. Earth needs us." They raced to the armory, donning their battle-scarred pressure suits and grabbing every weapon they could carry. As they marched towards the hangar, a ragtag army of human soldiers and scientists fell in step behind them, their faces set with desperate courage. Nicholas knew the odds were against them. The Xindi were stronger, more advanced, and out for blood. But he also knew that he and Pollux had faced impossible odds before and triumphed. As they boarded their waiting ships, Nicholas allowed himself a fleeting moment of fear, of doubt. Then he pushed it aside, focusing on the mission ahead. The fate of the world hung in the balance, and he would die before he let the Xindi take it. Nicholas's knuckles whitened on the control yoke as he gunned the thrusters, sending their battered ship hurtling toward the Xindi fleet. In the co-pilot's seat, Pollux worked furiously at the sensor array, his claws dancing over the holographic displays. "They outnumber us 100 to 1, he growled, his voice tight with tension. "And their weapons are far superior. We won't last long in a straight fight." Nicholas gritted his teeth, his mind racing. They had barely escaped the last battle, and now they were charging headlong into another, even more desperate one, but what choice did they have? Earth was defenseless, its forces in shambles. If they didn't stop the Zindi here and now, all would be lost. All would be. Suddenly an idea flashed through Nicholas's mind, a last desperate gambit. He glanced at the pulsing fragment of the orb, still clutched in Pollux' hand. "The wormhole," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion and fear. "We can use the fragment to create one more like before, but this time we fly into it ourselves, taking them with us." Pollux met his gaze, understanding dawning in his alien eyes. It was a suicide mission, a one-way trip into the unknown, but it was also their only chance to save Earth, to end the Zindi threat once and for all. "I'm with you," Pollux said simply, his voice steely with resolve. "To the end." Nicholas nodded, a lump forming in his throat. He reached for the comm panel, his fingers trembling as he opened a channel to Earth. "Mission Control, this is Nicholas. We're about to engage the Zindi fleet." He took a deep breath, steeling himself. "We're going to use the orb fragment to create a wormhole and fly into it with the Zindi ships. With any luck, we'll take them out of the picture for good." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end, then a burst of protests and pleas. But Nicholas cut them off, his voice firm. "There's no other way. Earth is defenseless, and we're out of options. His voice cracked, and he swallowed hard. "Tell Eliza that I'm sorry, and that I love her. Always have." He cut the channel before anyone could respond, blinking back the sudden sting of tears. There was no time for goodbyes, no time for regrets. They had a job to do. On Earth, in the mission control room, Eliza stared at the now silent comm panel, her heart shattering. She had known, in some deep, secret part of herself, that she loved Nicholas, had always loved him, from the moment they met at the academy, and now she might never see him again. "I'll make sure they remember you," she whispered, her voice choked with grief. "I'll make sure they never forget what you did for us." In space, Nicholas and Pollux flew their ship at full speed toward the Zindi fleet, weaving and dodging through a storm of plasma fire. The enemy ships loomed before them, their jagged hulls bristling with weapons. And then, with a blinding flash of light, the wormhole burst into existence before them, a swirling maelstrom of energy and impossible colors. The Zindi ships, caught off guard, veered and scattered, but it was too late. The gravitational pull of the wormhole seized them, dragging them inexorably toward its gaping maw. Nicholas and Pollux shared one last look, a silent moment of understanding and brotherhood. They had been through hell together, had fought and bled and sacrificed, and now they would face the unknown side by side, as comrades and friends. With a final defiant roar of the engines, they plunged their ship into the heart of the wormhole, the Zindi fleet close behind. The vortex collapsed around them, and for a moment there was nothing but silence and darkness. On Earth the world held its breath, waiting for a sign, a miracle. But as the minutes turned to hours, and the hours to days, the terrible truth began to sink in. Nicholas and Pollux were gone, lost to the infinite depths of the cosmos. The planet mourned, even as it celebrated. Memorials were built, statues erected, stories told. The names of Nicholas Jackson and Pollux the Zindi became legend, symbols of courage and sacrifice in the face of impossible odds. And as the years turned to decades, and humanity slowly rebuilt from the ashes, the tales of the two heroes who saved the world passed into myth and history. But they were never forgotten, never lost. For as long as humans looked up at the stars and dreamed, they would remember the bravery of those who had given everything for the sake of others. Somewhere in a distant corner of the universe, a battered ship emerged from the collapsing wormhole, tumbling into an alien sky. Inside, Nicholas and Pollux stumbled from the smoking wreckage, battered and bloodied, but alive. They looked out over a landscape of strange colors and twisted rock formations, a world unlike any they had ever known, a place where the very laws of nature seemed bent and warped, where nothing was as it seemed. But as they faced this new world, this new challenge, They did so as they had always done, together side by side, ready to fight for survival and for the chance to find their way back home. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.